I'm Allison Jonjak, the Cranberry Outreach Specialist with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. These videos are the on-demand recordings of UW Extension and the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association's virtual brown bag lunch series. These monthly sessions offer growers and researchers a way to share timely and relevant information. We hope you'll enjoy and continue to engage with us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Grant Holly. I'm the Executive Director of the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association. We are very happy to be able to partner with UW Extension to bring you the research needed to be able to navigate our ever-changing environment. I'd like to thank all of our speakers today for their valuable time and leadership, the growers for joining us, and Allison for being the catalyst from which all of these sessions rely. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. And right as we cross over into afternoon, I will advance our slides right here through the introduction. And I'm still working on getting the captions to display. As we kind of said, if Microsoft Azure has 2/3 of the airplanes down and our captions aren't working, we're still way ahead of the curve. So I'll get that solved before our speakers are presenting. Wanted to quickly go through our agenda. Steve Vavris is with UW-Madison as well as being the Wisconsin State climatologist, and he's going to give us an overview of the wet weather patterns that we've had thus far this year and a little bit of prospective into the future. Don Valentine since Leslie's unavailable, Don at Oregon State University is going to give some updates on a project that he's working on with Leslie, the same project, and discuss fruit rots and their sensitivities to fungicides. And then we'll wrap up the lunch hour with Jed Colquhoun talking about weed growth stages and weed wiping. As usual, if you have questions for clarification during the presentation, feel free to mute yourself and ask, or unmute yourself and ask, or you can use the chat box to ask. If you want to ask anonymously, use the drop down and say your question only to Allison Jonjak, and I'll ask it anonymously on your behalf. If you we'll also have a question and answer session at the end, so feel welcome to use both of those. I am going to is Grant here to give us a quick hello from the Growers Association? And if Grant is not, I will still at least say, as I'm with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension, but this is brought to us both by UW-Madison Division of Extension as well as the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association. So thanks to everyone who supports this and is getting information from here, and we're always welcoming feedback as well. So I have Jed up next, but I'm going to check whether we have any other questions that have come in during that time. But I'm not seeing any questions yet, so I will stop sharing screen and look forward to handing it to Jed.
Great. Yeah, and as the weather this week has become progressively nicer, I've been shortening my slides, knowing that you're probably like me and want to get back out there in the field or to enjoy it in some other way. So I'm going to keep my comments rather brief today, and I have just a few slides to share with you on the topic I've been asked to address, which is more broadly than wiper applications, late season weed management. What can we do in a wet season like this, where we're seeing probably a lot more escapes from control than we would see normally? In general, with our pre-emergent residual soil active herbicides, dilution is not the solution. And like many of you, I've noticed around the edges of beds in particular, where we're draining out water, we're probably also losing some of the residual of our herbicide earlier. And then the past couple of weeks, I've noticed the rims around the ditches and beds are now filling up with those typical late season characters, slender-leaved goldenrod, yellow loosestrife, and the least favorite of all, northern St. John's wort. So is there anything that we can do about some of these that can be wiped, or other aspects that we can do for late season weed management? So the topics I've been asked to address today are the questions. Can annual weeds be controlled this time of year? We'll talk a little bit about Wiper timings, do we do it in August because that's when we have less to do on the marsh, or is it because it's more effective? And then we'll talk about a little bit of the work that we've done in research about weed control after harvest. Does that show any potential? So let's talk a little bit about annual weeds in particular. In new plantings right now, we're seeing a lot of common ragweed, for example. In the past couple of weeks, I've had a lot of pictures sent to me or questions asked about annual weeds that are actually in the reproductive stage. So I'll get a picture, for example, of a grass that's starting to produce seed. And the question is, can I still control it? Unfortunately, the answer is no, it's not usually very successful at all. And my answer is more in depth based on the biology of those annual weeds, and then we'll contrast that to perennial weeds. Why not? And in annual weeds biology, during the earlier season in the vegetative stages, all of the resources that are being captured by those plants are put into the solar panels to capture nutrients and carbohydrates through photosynthesis, turn the sunlight into energy, basically. As annual weeds get to the reproductive stage, they switch from that vegetative production exclusively into reproduction, with the basic evolutionary idea that the more seed that's produced, the better outcome there would be for the progeny of that species, the more competitive they become. So these annual weeds are putting all of the resources right now into seed production. They, unlike perennials, are not packing it back in the roots. This is a one-trick pony for annual weeds. And herbicides generally tag along to the growing points, systemic herbicides like Roundup. So if you were to wipe an annual weed right now, all of the Roundup would go into the seed. There are two downsides to this. Number one, the competitive damage is done. Actually, three downsides. And number two, you're not doing anything to that vegetative tissue because it bypasses it to the reproductive structures. And kind of amazingly, number three, most of these herbicides don't prevent viable seed production. As a matter of fact, there are crops in which Roundup has been used historically as a desiccant to dry them down for harvest. Not for seed crops, but that seed still has shown to be viable in most cases. So not a good way to spend your time and money chasing after annual weeds that are already into that deep reproductive stage. So what about perennial weeds? Why do we wipe in August? Is it because that's when the high school kids are less busy and not back to school yet? Less going on the marsh? That may be true, but biologically, it's actually also a very good time, and we've seen this through research through decades now, to control some of these perennial weeds. And again, let's focus on the biological reasons for that. On perennial weeds, again, these herbicides move to the growing points. So like on the dewberry in this picture, you can see it's twisted up by an auxin mimic type herbicide. That herbicide goes to the growing points, the active new growth, whether that be leaves, occasionally flowers for perennials that produce seed also, or fruit. But the contrast in a perennial weed is it then translocates the carbohydrates and stored energy from the solar panels that have been built all summer back into the root structure to store that nutrient resource for winter. The following spring, it packs up those nutrients, builds more solar panels, and that process repeats. So in contrast, in a perennial weed, the herbicide, if it's systemic like 2,4-D or Roundup, will translocate into the root system and give us some long-term control. And in the extreme, I've seen situations where actually unintentionally, and an application of an incorrect herbicide Roundup, on perennial tree fruit, that Roundup will go to the growing points in those tree fruit trees. And then it's not until the next spring, after it's translocated into the roots and then brought back up to the growing point the following spring, that we see the damage. we'll see no damage at all in the year in which it's applied. The tree will stay beautifully green, even produce fruit. But then in this mistaken application scenario, the herbicide goes into the roots, it gets stored there, and it comes back out. As a matter of fact, I'm dealing with a couple of drift cases in grape vineyards right now from applications last summer. So in a perennial, that herbicide can be quite persistent. If any of you are dabbling in Quinstar right now or read the newsletter article that I wrote about that, that's the exact scenario with Quinstar on perennial weeds. Be patient. Sometimes growers have seen better control the year after application. Some of that soil uptake, but part of it is this foliar translocation to the roots and then back up to the foliage in the following spring. So it's an effective time of year, not only because we have more human resources available, but also from the standpoint of resource management in perennial weeds. So which herbicides? This is really simple. It hasn't changed for years. Roundup, 30-day pre-harvest interval, which gives us a nice time in August in most years to be able to do that. Keep in mind, most Roundup products already have surfactant in it, and many don't allow additional surfactant in wiper applications because the risk is some of these surfactants will cause them to foam up or drip or lose their consistency. Remember, some are spreaders. They'll lose the consistency to be able to stay in the wiper and cause more damage as they drip. Weedar 64 is the other classic 2,4-D type product, the only 2,4-D labeled for wiper application in cranberry that I'm familiar with. This one can volatilize or move a little off the wiped plants, so you have to be able to accept some crop injury. But again, a 30-day pre-harvest interval and supports our August type timing. So the other question I get is about what about post-harvest? The wiper applications in particular, that's a current research project that we're involved in. And most of our classic post-emergent wiper herbicides, like a Roundup, after a plant has gone through a hard freeze, it's just not translocated as effectively. It's not persistent enough in the plant to be able to overcome these time periods where during freeze, we get less translocation within the plant. So we're switching gears in our research this year to look at some products that do persist in a plant. And some of these are already used in the forestry sector. I use them in my own woodlands and cut stump applications. And we do this in January and February to control box elder and buckthorn, and it prevents them from emerging again the next spring. So it is effective even during these freezing conditions. So we'll take that to the cranberry marsh and look at some post-harvest wiper applications, because the advantage there is the cranberries, of course, much more dormant. We also get asked about, what if I put on Devernal, Casseron, pre-emergent after harvest? Some labels would support that. I can tell you, we've done a lot of that type of research. It's just not effective to put an herbicide on in fall, put a flood on, maybe a couple of floods, maybe have trouble making ice and flood again, come back to a trash flood or insect flood in the spring, flood for weather, and then expect to have enough herbicide to give you weed control that following spring. It's just far too much dilution and herbicide breakdown in that case. So I would not suggest that with our typical pre-emergent residual herbicides. And finally, just for the fun of it, a lot of you have been asking about this laser weeder work that we're doing in some of the other crops that I work with. Here it is in onions. This is not even close to being ready for cranberry, but the idea isn't to look at this tool on tracks going through an onion field and think that that could possibly be what you're going to do in cranberries. But what if you had the lasers off of this tool, for example, mounted on your boom, cantilevered boom, and we're able to use it on the marsh eventually down the road in a few years. So my goal is to actually take some cranberry weeds that are more persistent, take them to the laser weeder location. It's in southeast Wisconsin, and see if we can even kill some more typical perennial weeds with lasers. And then if that did work, there could be work, obviously, to modify this. There are many companies getting in the high-powered laser game to be able to look at some more perennial weed control. Let's see if we can make this work just for the fun of it. It's very gratifying. We've spent a lot of time this summer working with the school and research, and it's very gratifying to watch those weeds sizzle in the field. This particular unit is 20 feet wide, has 30 lasers on it. The lasers shoot every 50 milliseconds. In onions, we're shooting an average of 550,000 weeds per acre. Whoops. That's a picture of the bigger unit in the field. To give you the idea of the accuracy, this little one-leaf onion is about 3 inches long, to put it in perspective. This is a little tiny carpet weed, has sub-millimeter accuracy. Here it shot the carpet weed right next to the onion without hitting the onion. In an onion, this is the cotyledon that just naturally dries down. That's not laser weeder damage. So it shoots an average of 555,000 of these per acre. It also makes a map by species of where it shot every weed. So just an amazing technology. And we'll look to see if eventually someday it might have an application in cranberries. And with that, Allison, with a little fun tour of an onion marsh, we'll get back to the cranberry marsh if there are any questions.
Absolutely. As I wait for people to start asking questions, I will ask, is this similar to welding, where if you are really close to the laser weeder, you're wearing protective goggles, but if you're enough yards away, it's not a vision issue?
No, you don't need any welding paraphernalia to be able to follow the laser weeder. They're not visible to the naked eye. You wouldn't want to look into the laser at all, but it's very safe to follow behind it and such. In that same sense, so there are people looking at it as a way to control things like beetles and potatoes with that sub-millimeter accuracy. You can have a Colorado potato beetle barbecue in the field.
That sounds exciting.
Yeah.
I will keep waiting for other questions. While I wait for those, I want to remind everyone of the summer field day, which is going to be August 14th at Cutler Cranberry in City Point. If you need extra details for that, I believe the Growers Association has been sending out information, but if you've missed an invite, send me an email, send me a text, and I will get the information to you. We do pause these brown bags during August for the summer field day in order to let you focus on the field day. And then for September and October, we know everyone is busy harvesting. So we resume again in December and November and December, focusing on kind of a nationwide roundup of other research that's going on. We've had 3 really excellent speakers today. I'm surprised to not see more questions coming in. All right, here we go. For small trees growing in the field, is it as effective to wipe them in May or early June than compared with August? So that's a question for Jed.
So no, it's not very effective to wipe a lot of perennials, including trees, in May and June. Again, getting back to the perennial weed biology, they're pumping those resources into the growing points. And over time, with something like Roundup will bind to even the small particles within the plant and become less available for management. So it gets bound up in there, and you don't get the hitting power of getting it translocated into the roots. For a perennial plant in general, the best time to translocate anything to the roots would be from when it's in the bloom stage to the first hard freeze is the most effective. So, in maples, even when you see the little whirlybirds flying around the yard to when we get our first hard freeze, that's about the best timings. And that does support this in general, August to early September timing. But keep in mind, the pre-harvest intervals will limit your back end of the application window.
That's a really
Neither
cool.
one is Quinstar the only control for northern St. John's wort. And is it effective to apply this late in the season? Great question, Tom. Across our research, Quinstar in northern St. John's wort in the year in which it's applied has given us roughly about 60% control, which is a nice start. And it does give this persistent control that can last for at least another season. So it could actually get better beyond that initial evaluation period. This late in the season is really kind of a tough question. I would say yes, in the sense that it gives you even that 60% suppression for a pretty long period of time. So what you see 2 weeks after application, don't expect that to be the end game for Quinstar. It takes quite some time to get the optimal effectiveness, 3 to 6 months. Or in Massachusetts, I've had growers tell me that they see their best control the season after application. It's very persistent. Now with Quinstar, though, one thing I want to keep in mind is July 20th or so, July 19th. We're getting a little close to the 60-day pre-harvest interval, depending on what the weather does and who you're delivering to and such. So that's the other thing that will run you out of gas on this is the pre-harvest interval for Quinstar. Please keep that in mind.
I have also got a question on, is there experience with lawn trell or stinger on clover or sheep sorrel after harvest?
Yeah, great question, Jeff. We have had some experience quite a while ago with stinger post-harvest with some pretty decent results in a warm fall. I'm going to extend you extrapolate a little bit. One of the other crops in which I've done a lot of stinger work is strawberries. And we have tried that in strawberries as we get closer to putting mulch on strawberries because clover is a significant issue there also. And we have, assuming that we haven't gone through a really hard freeze, we have had some luck controlling things like clover in a later season application. If you've been through several really hard freezes in which you weren't flooded up for harvest or anything like that, you're going to lose some of that effectiveness.
I have another question that isn't in the chat, but I've been vaguely asked it in the last couple of days with the new allowance of Quinstar. So bearing in mind the 60-day pre-harvest interval, if I had a bed that had pressure from yellow loosestrife and northern St. John's wort and sticktights, what is your preferred, best possible time to make that Quinstar application? Pretend we're in 2025, so I have the whole year ahead of me.
Yeah, and let's pretend that Quinstar is still accepted by your handlers and the MRL is still good for export and such in 2025. So we need to make sure all those ducks are in order before people get gung-ho about anything beyond where we're at today. I'm going to make this a little more general. The best timing by far for Quinstar is on smaller weeds earlier in the year. As they get larger, partly because of this translocation type issue in a bigger plant and closer to reproduction that I mentioned earlier. Also, some of these plants like dewberry puts on a pretty thick cuticle. Some of the St. John's worts like marsh St. John's wort gets a thicker cuticle later in the season, harder to get herbicides in it. In general, our experience has been Quinstar earlier has been more efficacious than later. And a weed like dodder, it's a drastic drop-off. Quinstar on Wisconsin dodder, I don't know if we have any Massachusetts folks, but in Wisconsin, Quinstar on dodder early in the season as it just hits the top of the vines is very easy to control with Quinstar. Dodder later in the season, like post-bloom full fruit set, we wouldn't see control until next season. So in general, Quinstar has been much more effective on smaller weeds. Don't spray it during bloom. Not worth it. Don't disrupt the bees.
Yes. we have about 1 minute left if there are any other questions. Otherwise, I want to thank Steve as well as Don as well as Jed for giving us these great in-season updates. And anyone having any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out. Otherwise, we're going to look forward to seeing you at the summer field day in August 14th at Cutler, Cranberry, and City Point. Last minute for any questions. Thank you all for joining today.